1 minute. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Well, good morning, colleagues. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to FEDCO, Comité des finances et développement économique pour la ville d'Ottawa pour le 1er mars, the 1st of March. This meeting will be held through electronic participation. Do we have quorum, Madam Coordinator?
Yes, we do, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I'll do a quick roll call of members. Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor DeRuse.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Moffat. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Vice Chair Dudas.
Present.
Are there any conflicts of interest? Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt? Confirmation of minutes for minutes 34, 1st of February 2022, the 1er février 2022. Adopté, carried.
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 As presented. FEDCO, item 1, 2021 statement of remuneration, benefits, and expenses paid to members of council and council appointees. Received.
Received.
Residential vacant unit tax. We have a number of delegations, so we'll come back to that. Office of the City Clerk, Bureau du Greffier Municipal, rapport annuel de Bureau du Greffier, receive and carried.
Received.
Update on the 2022 municipal elections and amendments to elections-related bylaw and policies.
Can we hold this? Can we hold this?
Can we hold that?
Okay, Councillor Hubley and Gower, come back to that. Item 5, status update, FEDCO inquiries and motions for the period ending February 17th, received.
Received.
Planning, real estate, and economic development. This item is being held. Councillor Cloutier, you have a motion?
Being held, being deferred, Mr. Mayor. Whereas a pedestrian bridge over the Queensway to connect to the Center LRT station is an important missing link, and additional time is needed to review this component and its role in the memorandum of agreement with Public Services Procurement Canada and Canada Lands Company. Therefore, be it resolved that the lands exchange of 529 Tremblay Road and 530 Tremblay Road with Her Majesty the Queen in right of Canada, listed as item 6 on the FEDCO Agenda 35 of March 1st, 2022 meeting, be deferred to the next FEDCO meeting of April 5th, 2022.
Okay, on the motion by Councillor Cloutier, this is in your ward, Councillor, I believe all of it. Carried. Adopted.
Carried.
Staff support that. Next.
Councillor Fleury, I think, is putting his hand up.
Well, Councillor Fleury on this item.
Mr. Mal, thank you, and thank you, Councillor Cloutier. I wrote to real estate staff yesterday on the matter, and I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if it could also, if we could gain some clarity in the report when it comes back in relations to affordable housing requirements for Canada Lands Corporation. I didn't see it in the report and was looking for clarity, so I wonder if real estate staff can take that as a direction.
You have to get someone to move the direction because you're not on the committee. Councillor Cloutier, you willing to do that?
Sure. Yes, I will so move. With the report does deal with the land exchange and the site plan as opposed to the zoning. But okay, yes, if staff can provide some clarity on the path forward with respect to affordable housing in that piece of land, I would so move that direction.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's carried on deferral. Now we're back to item number 2, which is the first item we have delegates for. And this is the residential vacant unit tax. We have a presentation by our Chief Financial Officer, Wendy Stephenson. So Ms. Stephenson, we'll hear from you, then delegations, and then questions to staff. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le maire et les membres du comité. Je suis ici ce matin avec Joseph Mahoney pour mettre à jour le comité sur le rapport sur la taxe sur les logements vacants. Before I begin the formal presentation this morning, I really want to express my sincere thanks to staff for their tremendous work on this new program and the report and recommendations that you have in front of you today. And my thanks go to Natalia Unifikova, Michael Chemelik, Eric Leclerc, Chad Featherstone, Dinah Milkensteins, Jeremy Lemeroux, and Krista O'Brien. So again, my thanks to them for all the work on this. And the report that you have in front of you today provides a program overview, framework, a draft bylaw, as well as an implementation plan. And the overall policy objectives align with retaining and returning rental stock to the rental market. And I'll just wait for Carol to pull up the presentation. And you can move to the second slide, please. Thank you, Carol. The purpose of this tax is to encourage property owners to return residential units to the housing supply by renting or occupying or selling their units. And the added supply is expected to play a role in market dynamics of housing affordability. The residential vacant unit tax is one of very many tools that we have to assist us with our housing affordability. The initial framework was approved by Council on June the 9th, 2021, directing staff to develop the tax regime and an implementation plan and continue our stakeholder consultations with an effort to finalize the program as presented in the report today. We conducted a public survey throughout 2021, and that showed that 77% of the 3,500 respondents supported the idea of the residential vacant unit tax in Ottawa. Residents, businesses, associations, among others, were welcome to provide their feedback through the survey, also through Engage Ottawa, or reaching out to staff directly. At the delegations during the FEDCO meeting of June 1st, 2021, there were a few issues that were raised, and staff committed to continuing to engage stakeholders to flush those out. And the report that you have presented here today reflects the results of those extensive consultations with the working groups and the stakeholders that were consulted. Staff have consulted with external stakeholders such as the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, the Ottawa Real Estate Board, the Ottawa Small Landlord Association, and the Eastern Ontario Landlords Association, among others. Staff also considered other initiatives that have been introduced by the federal, provincial, and other municipal governments, and we've provided an environmental analysis as an appendix to this report. Each level of government, as you know, has a role to play with respect to housing affordability. And since our last update, both Toronto and Hamilton have approved their vacant unit tax programs, with their first year of billing being in 2023. And our program is closely aligned to each of those. I'll now pass it over to Joseph.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we'll just go over some of the eligibility and definitions for this program. So the Municipal Act prescribes that only residential properties with up to 6 units can be subject to the tax if deemed vacant. So these properties are referred to as eligible properties and reside in the residential property tax class only. So staff have developed the following definitions on the conditions of vacancy that determine when the tax would apply. So a residential unit is considered vacant if it has been unoccupied for an aggregate of more than 184 days, which is half of the leap year plus 1 day during the previous calendar year. An unoccupied unit is defined as a residential property that is not the principal residence or not rented for more than, not a principal residence or not rented for more than 30 days consecutively. A principal residence is a residential unit that is owned or rented where the natural person is ordinarily makes their residence, makes their home, and conducts their daily affairs. And a property owner can only have one principal residence. Our bylaw has a little bit more detail in terms of this definition. It includes a couple of other items that would qualify what a principal residence is. Les résidences principales sont donc exemptées de la définition d'un logement inoccupé pour cet impôt et élimine ainsi la nécessité d'exonération multiples liées au mode de vie ou au travail. Principal residences are therefore exempt from the definition of a vacant unit tax for this tax, and thus eliminates the need for multiple vacancy exemptions related to lifestyle or work. So it's important that residents understand that if they have a principal residence, that principal residence is not subject to this tax. So if they're away from their homes due to lifestyle activities or due to work activities for more than 184 days, as long as it's their principal residence, the tax will not apply. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. Environ 330 000 propriétaires fonciers devront soumettre une déclaration obligatoire annuelle. Les déclarations obligatoires se sont avérées très efficaces lors de la mise en œuvre d'un impôt sur les logements vacants. La période de déclaration d'un logement préalablement inoccupé débutera le 1er janvier de chaque année. Les propriétaires foncières devront remplir leur déclaration d'inoccupation annuelle, principalement en ligne, des arrangements étant preuve pour ceux qui ne le peuvent pas. En février, on demandera à tous les propriétaires fonciers admissibles de déclarer l'état d'inoccupation de leur propriété pour l'année précédente. Et c'est avant la date limitée de l'impôt foncier provisoire, soit la mi-mars. Les propriétaires fonciers qui remplissent leur déclaration après la date limite se verront imposer des frais de déclaration tardive de $250 à compter de 2024 et accorder un report de date la limite au 30 avril. Si un propriétaire n'a pas fait sa déclaration à nouvelle date limite, son logement sera considéré comme vacant. La facture d'impôt sur les logements vacants sera envoyée en mai, en même temps que la dernière facture d'impôt foncier et devra être réglée à la même date, soit à la mi-juin. I'll repeat in English. An estimated 330 property owners will be required to submit an annual mandatory declaration. Mandatory declarations have been proven to be the most effective when implementing a vacant unit tax. The declaration period will open on January 1st each year for the previous vacancy year. And the annual declaration will be primarily completed by property owners online with accommodations for those that cannot. And when we talk about accommodations for those that cannot, it's for those that need accessibility accommodations or for people that may not be able to access these tools online. In February, all eligible property owners will be notified to report their property's prior year vacancy status before the declaration deadline, which will be the interim tax bill due date, which is in mid-March. Property owners who declare after the deadline will be charged a late declaration fee of $250, but that will only start in 2024 and provided with an extended due date of April 30th. If a property owner has not reported by the extended due date, the property will be deemed vacant. The vacancy tax will be issued as part of the final tax bill in May and will be due with the final property taxes in mid-June. The proposed administration and billing for the program that we've created allows staff to leverage existing tools to minimize the administrative burden. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about the exemptions. Staff are proposing the following exemptions in order to manage perhaps some unintended consequences where a property is declared or deemed vacant. So an exemption may apply for any of the following circumstances. Where a property was transferred under non-arm's length sale in the previous calendar year. It may also apply where a federal or provincial court order prohibiting occupancy, sale, or rental of a property is in effect. An exemption could be provided where the death of the registered owner occurred during the tax year. And it could also be provided where the registered owner was in care in the sense that they were in a hospital, long-term care facility during the tax year. An exemption would also apply where the property was undergoing extended renovations or construction, and all the appropriate building permits were issued and in place. An exemption will also apply where a property is defined as a cottage and has a valid short-term rental license and proof of 100 days occupancy and proof of income. Let's move to the next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about audits and dispute resolution for this program. So in order to encourage compliance and accurate declaration of vacant units, the regime will have a strong audit function to audit annual declarations and claimed exemptions. Audits will happen year-round and will have the ability to retroactively go back for a maximum of 2 years. Audits may be random. They may be based on targeted campaigns, tips or complaints, or previous year compliance history, just to name a few. Where a false declaration is found, the property will be deemed vacant and the tax will apply. The property owner will also be subject to a fine of up to $10,000 for providing false declaration. The city also has set up a dispute resolution process, which is an important feature to this regime. It provides a mechanism for property owners who believe they have been unfairly charged the tax to be heard and go through the review process. The city has developed a 2-tier dispute resolution mechanism for the vacant unit tax. The first will be a notice of complaint. A property owner can submit a complaint if an error was made when they were submitting their declaration, an error was made by the city. They can also submit a complaint if they're disputing the vacant unit tax as a result of an audit. They can also submit a notice of complaint if the property was occupied, but they had not submitted their declaration by the late declaration date. A second tier will be available if they are denied on the first round, which will be the request for review whose outcome will be final. A property owner will be able to request the notice of complaint review decision within 90 days of the denial of the notice of complaint. Let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. So staff are recommending a tax rate of 1%, which is consistent with what we had recommended in our initial framework in June of last year. And that would yield a vacant unit tax of $4,100 on the average assessed vacant home in Ottawa. Since the city or any other agency does not consistently track vacant unit data, staff will not know exactly how many vacant unit properties there are within the city until the first vacant unit declaration is complete. However, at this time, staff can estimate confidently that we have about 1,653 properties in Ottawa that would be subject to the tax, vacant unit tax. Assuming a 1% tax rate and 1,653 vacant unit properties and a reduction in vacant units over time, we estimate that $33.2 million in gross revenues would be collected through this tax over the first 6 years. To run this program, staff estimate that $3.9 million in startup costs will be required over the first 2.5 years, and after that, about $1.4 million annually to run the program. After program costs, a tax is estimated to net the city about $25.1 million over the first 5 to 6 years. I will now pass it back over to Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joseph, and you can move to the next slide, Carol. So should council approve this report, staff are going to immediately apply to the province to have Ottawa designated as a municipality that can levy the vacant unit tax, as the Municipal Act requires that designation. Staff expect the provincial designation to be in place by Q2, and we're going to subsequently place the bylaw, the draft bylaw that you have in front of you today, on council's agenda immediately following that provincial approval. Extensive communications have happened and will happen. We're going to kick off a secondary communications plan in Q2 of 2022, and it's going to run through April of 2023. And that communication campaign includes targeted mailouts, tax bill inserts, social media, online advertisements, newspaper and radio announcements, as well as public service announcements, and leveraging ottawa.ca as much as possible. The vacancy declaration period for 2022 is going to run from January 1st to March 16th of 2023, and our late declaration period will run from March 17th to April 30th, 2023. And while the majority of the declarations will be completed online, staff are committed to providing alternative, accessible declaration methods for our residents. L'impôt sur les logements vacants sera ajouté à la dernière fraction d'impôt foncier en mai 2023 pour les propriétaires qui satisfont à la définition sur l'impôt sur les logements vacants. The vacant unit tax will be billed on the final property tax bill in May 2022 for properties that meet the vacant unit definition. And c'est la fin de cette présentation. Monsieur le maire, merci.
Merci beaucoup, Wendy. And Joseph, thank you for a very thorough report. We have a number of speakers. So the first is Salma El-Shahabi. Good morning. Just wait till you're in the chat. Salma El-Shahabi, are you there? We can see you, but we can't hear you. Are you on mute? Salma El-Shahabi.
It looks like she's just working to get her sound up, Mayor, by the looks of it.
We can see you, Salma, but we can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. You got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Just give me a second. I'm not ready yet. All right. Okay. I did submit a slide show for to share with you, if that would be possible to have on the screen. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. As I have shared in June before, I have asked you to reject this tax, and I'm going to be sharing with you today some information why. Please, next. So my recommendation is to reject this tax because when I was talking to staff, they were reluctant to share this tax onto the commercial purpose-built rentals in addition to other reasons, but that was one of the reasons I have asked you to do this. Alternatively, I'm proposing that we assess other jurisdictions that have seemed to have better outcomes, like Edmonton, where they have higher vacancy rates and lower rent rates, as well as lower sale prices for their homes. Additionally, we have introduced multiple policies in the past few months, including our official plan and the short-term rentals. And I think it would be worthwhile for us to wait a bit before we introduce this tax, just to be able to untangle any complexities. Because when Vancouver came back to assess it, that was one of the issues. They had introduced so many, they couldn't, isolate the single impact of this tax. Next, please. I'll get into the reports where the definition was told by the staff. It must be fair and equitable in ensuring it targets the correct unit of taxation for taxation. As you can see on the circle on the right, that's the number of homeowner units that will be targeted by this tax. The blue one is the exempt, and I'm putting it in quotation there, because if a property owner does not declare by a certain deadline, they could be subjected to the tax. So there is certain conditions they have to meet before they actually are exempt from this tax. The the yellow thin line in that blue circle is the minimum targeted taxes that are, the minimum targeted units that could be potentially taxable, and the gray one is the range. So the yellow and the gray is the range that the staff have provided, which is 760 units to 3,000 units. If we look into the circle on the left, that's the vacant units in Ottawa, as again by staff report. They said we have 22,000 total vacancy units, and of those, only between 760 to 3,000 are actually taxable. So between 86% and 96% is exempt from this tax. So how is this fair, equitable, or targeting the right units? When I talked to staff about having this tax applied to the commercial ones, they were reluctant because they know it's going to impact the supply. Next, please. So how much of the proposed revenues that's coming from what staff have proposed is actually from late reporting fees? Additionally to the policy recommendation, we have, there is one issue with the billing. It says, you want to send the bills in late May and have them due by the third Thursday of June. So who has 4 to 10 grants sitting in their bank accounts to pay within 3 weeks or 2 to 3 weeks if this was to be applied? So if this was to be proceeded, I think that has to be looked at again. Next, please. I'm going to be talking about the impacts on the housing market, and staff assume that we have positive outcome, and therefore they have not provided any feasibility study that includes potential housing services cost increase as a result of this tax. But this assumption is not true, and I'm going to show you how by looking at the next slides. Please, next. So how much increase in housing supply from existing vacant units? If you look into the circle, the light purple is the number of units that are expected to be or remain vacant despite of this tax. The green, the darker green, is the one that could potentially go back to the market within 6 years. And the light green is if we have that bigger segment of the, if we have the 3,000 vacant units, then we have the light green and the green, the dark green as a result coming back to the market. So over 6 years, we will have up to 1,000 units, only maximum, coming back to the market. And they're saying this is going to help with the housing supply. This is not even worth 2 months worth of housing supply over 6 years. Our official plan was where we could added a significant number of housing units, and we did not. So how is this going to actually make a difference in our life? Next, please. So looking at Vancouver, sale prices have continued to increase after implementing the vacant unit tax. New construction of tax targeted units have dropped. And when the pandemic hit, everybody wanted tax targeted units. And as a result, there was skyrocketing in housing prices. What this means to homeowners, that means their values are going to go higher up than usual. And as a result, they'll be paying more in property taxes. So even if they comply with this tax, they're going to be impacted negatively in terms of property tax values. Next, please. And with rental affordability, these are some figures from CMHC report in 2020, where they said for 5 consecutive years. So if you go back to the history, since the implementation of the vacant unit tax equivalent in Vancouver, rent rates have only increased. The market rent for vacant units have been always higher than those for occupied units. So we're really not getting much there. We need to lower these these rates, not increase them. And the figure to the right, it talks about how most of a lot of the vacant units in Vancouver are those higher ends. So it doesn't really help in terms of affordability. Next, please. And what this means for tenants is that they'll find higher selectivity.
If you can wrap up, please, you're over your time.
Sorry.
Just 30 more seconds.
Okay. So can I finish?
Well, you've got 30 seconds because you're over your time.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to wrap up here. So in staff report, staff refused to give landlords exemptions for LTB. They asked to have more selectivity. So this is going to be something for tenants to worry about, more selectivity, higher rent rates, and possible evictions. And this will monopolize the market.
Thank you. We're going to have to.
Yeah, just next.
Sorry, it's well over 5 minutes. So does anyone have a question? I don't see any hands up. Okay, thank you very much. Next is Alex Cullen, Federation of Citizens Association.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wave. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'm here on behalf of the Federation of Citizens Associations, which I think many of you know, represents some 74 community and citizen groups in the city of Ottawa. The staff report lists a number of organizations that were consulted regarding the development of this report. Unfortunately, the FCA, whose membership consists mostly of homeowner associations, was not, as the proposed residential vacant unit tax could affect some 330,000 residential properties in the city. This is an oversight. The purpose of this proposed residential vacant unit tax is to ensure that residential properties are being used for their intended purpose as residences in order to discourage speculation that contributes to higher housing prices. It is not clear that Ottawa has a problem with residential property speculation, nor that such a tax would be effective in reducing or ameliorating rising housing prices. We're not aware of a cost-benefit analysis in imposing this tax that has been done. Our biggest concern is the use of negative option billing as the means of applying the residential vacant unit tax. Negative option billing, where the onus is on the consumer to apply to be exempt from paying imposed charges, very unpopular with consumers and with just cause. In fact, there's legislation both federally and provincially governing these business practices. That's why there are very few examples where such approach has proven successful. Residential property owners will object to having a residential tax of 1% of their assessed value being imposed on them, particularly if the process to become exempt from this tax is onerous, imposing a late fee of $250 for those who find themselves having to prove that they're exempt is simply adding salt to the wound. Councillors will be aware that not every homeowner uses or has access to the internet. Councillors will be aware that many homeowners have their property taxes paid through their financial institutions and may not receive the notice. We expect that many homeowners will not be aware that the failure to file an exemption with the city could lead to the imposition of a tax of 1% of their home's assessed value, $4,000 or more in many cases, or having to pay $250 to prove that they should be exempt from the tax. Councillors should realize that they will receive complaints from homeowners in these situations. Should the city decide to pursue a residential vacant unit tax, it should insert into the process a notice mailed to those homeowners who've been identified as candidates to have these tax imposed on them by virtue of not applying for the exemption by the third Thursday in March. You have a schedule there of notices that people are supposed to get in their notice by the third Thursday in March. So if they haven't done so by the third Thursday in March, they should get a notice indicating that they're potentially liable for this tax. The deadline to respond to such a notice would be the end of April, after which a late fee could be imposed. If the city staff are correct that the bulk of homeowners will have responded by the third Thursday in March, then this extra step will not be costly and should reduce the incidence of complaints and corrections. In conclusion, while the goal of penalizing residential housing speculation may be laudable, the means being recommended to implement this tax is not. City Council will be wise to tread carefully in imposing a negative option billing approach to homeowners, many of whom will not qualify for this tax. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. Are there any hands up, Carol? Councillor Luloff, did you have your hand up? Councillor Luloff?
No, Mayor, thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Next is Cheryl Parrott, Hintonburg Community Association, and she also provided us with written comments. Good morning, Ms. Parrott. Nice to see you virtually.
Good morning, and I'm just so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased about this tax. So I'm representing the Hintonburg Community Association, and we really very enthusiastically support this proposed tax. We're really hopeful that it will result in a decrease in the number of vacant properties and in some of the many issues that these properties have caused in our community, and stop the cycle of whack-a-mole that we've been in for so many years, where we're required to call property standards. They come out, they give an order, eventually it gets done. And at this point, it's taking about a month for officers to respond. And then by then there's a new issue that we have to start the process all over again. We understand this won't stop development. It's not proposed to stop redevelopment. The purpose for us is to keep those units with people in them until redevelopment happens. And that's not what's happened in our community. We researched the Vancouver model and presented the idea of a vacant property tax at the CPS budget review in the fall of 2020. And we were encouraged that they were using excess revenues to help fund affordable housing. In the summer of 2020, there were so many homeless encampments along the Trillium Line pathway. Then in the fall, Tom Brown Arena transitioned to the Respite Center. And we had some break-ins to the vacant buildings at the same time. And it was really getting very cold outside. But we were struck by the contrast of homeless people less than 2 blocks away from 11 vacant boarded properties in our community. Our neighbors had been evicted from many of these perfectly good rental units, some of which now have been vacant for as long as 10 years. We have lost so many affordable buildings, and they're replaced by boarded buildings. They're not replaced by new buildings, and they sit that way for years. We've dealt with this increasing number of vacant, neglected buildings for so long, and the cost to our community, to bylaw services, to fire, to police is enormous, and we as taxpayers are paying those prices. The property management of these buildings has fallen on us rather than on the property owners. Yes, they comply with an order, but only when an order is issued, and that costs a lot of money and time and aggravation. We hope that you'll schedule a review within 2 years to see if the 1% tax is sufficient to affect the required change in behavior, or whether a higher tax is warranted. Thank you for moving ahead so quickly on this. We look forward to the coming companion report on the vacant property strategy review to provide some other tools to help address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's nice to hear and see you. Any questions for Ms. Parrott? No. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Cameron, I didn't see your hand.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Parrott. I appreciate that you've done a lot of research on this in terms of what Vancouver has done. And the previous delegation was talking about the negative option billing. Was that done in Vancouver, and how did that go over?
I'm not sure, and I'm sure staff can answer that, but I believe so. And I guess to us, it doesn't really matter how it's done. There needs to be a way of having some kind of financial disincentive to leave a building empty, boarded, with garbage dropped there and graffiti and weeds and stuff like that. So we need some disincentive, whether it's the negative billing option or another option, we don't care. We just need something to happen so that it doesn't fall on us and us as taxpayers as well, to pay the high cost of, every time bylaw goes out there, it's a good $200 that we pay on our taxes. Then you get a fire, that's a lot of money. Police have to go, if the building's broken into, bylaw won't go till police go and clear it. So then you've got twice as many people going. It just has not worked.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Parrott. Next is John Dickey, Eastern Ontario Landlord Association. Welcome, Mr. Dickey. John?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and hello, councillors. EOLO represents Ottawa's largest for-profit rental housing providers and many mid-sized and small landlords. I did submit a written submission, and I'll be referring to the different points on that submission. First, I must say EOLO realizes that the VUT does not apply to buildings of 7 or more units as multi-res properties. However, a fair number of our members own residential property and develop new multi-residential property. And the first stage of development is usually land assembly. And that is how all EOLO's members face an impact from this proposed tax. The submission explains that there are often good reasons for a vacancy before development, but I don't plan to spend time on that issue because it seems to me this tax is pretty much a done deal in terms of its broad structure. I would emphasize that EOLO would very much oppose any higher rate of tax than 1%. And certainly even among the people who responded, 1%, more than 1%, I'm sorry, more than half either wanted no tax at all or wanted only 1%. It's fewer of the people who wanted more than that. And that means a very, very tiny fraction of the residents of Ottawa wanted a higher tax more than that. What EOLO is seeking is a revision to one of the exemptions. And here I must apologize because I think I misunderstood the way this tax is going to work. And so I think I need to turn what I'm requesting a little bit differently. And perhaps staff can clarify when they come on. But as I understand it now, carefully reading the bylaw, if there's a sale in, let's say, 2022, then the new owner will be exempt from this tax in 2023. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't cover the period between the purchase and the year end. So rather than what I put in my submission, which was trying to address people who bought the property late in the year to give them something, what I think I need to ask for orally is for a tweak to the tax to allow a purchaser to apply to have the tax canceled on the property for the time period after the purchase date. And the reason I'm recommending this is that what the city wants is for someone who's been holding a property for several years, as Ms. Parrott says, and not doing anything with it, to sell it to someone who does something with it. And the best way to do that is that the tax stays on the property until the sale date, but the tax comes off the property, the extra tax it is, not the whole property tax, but the extra tax comes off the property following the sale date. And then presumably in the agreement of purchase and sale, the tax adjustment clause can provide that the old tax is paid by the vendor and the new tax is paid by the purchaser. That is the standard rate of tax. I would also suggest to you that a vacant property saves the city money in some ways, as well as costing the city money, because a vacant property doesn't have service calls from the emergency measures people that someone's had a heart attack. I mean, I've been taken to the hospital twice or 3 times by EMS. They're great service, but if there's no one living in the property, the city doesn't have that cost. The not vacant properties don't use libraries, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, there are 2 sides to this story. So the then the last point I wanted to make was that I think, or Aola would submit that there is a problem with one of the definitions in the draft bylaw. The definition is of arm's length. This I referenced at the bottom of page 4 of the EOLO submission. And I suspect the definition was taken from MPAC, which uses it to decide what sales to include in its valuation process. The definition is mostly correct and applicable, but for the vacancy, no vacancy test, there is no need for equal bargaining power. For the parties to be independent is sufficient. So EOLA would ask that the phrase possesses equal bargaining power be removed from the definition of arm's length, which is found in the draft bylaw.
John,
a minor point, I'm sure, but
right,
you know, let's get this thing clean. And I may say I have sympathy for what Mr. Cullen said with respect to a lot of people are going to have to file these declarations and maybe angry and annoyed. But
Dickey,
as I say, my biggest pitch is these 2 specific,
John,
I think, almost technical, or at least very.
John, sorry, you've gone over your time, and I don't know if you're hearing me. Can you hear me? Back on. John, can you hear? Hello, John, can you hear me?
I don't think he can.
I can't hear Mayor Watson speaking at this point.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? John, can you hear? All right, can everyone else? Councillor Kavanaugh, you had a question? We'll see if your system works. You don't have a question? Okay, thank you very much, John. Oops. It says ask to unmute. Okay, well, let's go to the next person then. Okay, unfortunately, we can't say goodbye to John. Some problem, but we have Morley Brownstein or Jean Mullen, Bel Air Community Association. Are they with us?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, and can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Is this,
good morning, Mayor Watson and councillors. This is Jean Mullen. I'm the co-president of the Bel Air Community Association. Morley Brownstein, who put together our submission, unfortunately, he had an appointment to go. So I'm going to do the submission on our quickly. Yes.
Sorry, you're cutting out. You're cutting out a little bit. So maybe I don't know if you could speak closer to the microphone. That might help.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, much better. Thank you. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. Just to say that we definitely support we're part of the members of the FCA, so we definitely support their submission. It is great to see that there is some tools for the city to utilize for vacant properties. I understand having affordable and reasonable vacancies for people to actually get rental properties filled. I guess what we would want to make sure that we have is that we do have a lot of elderly people in our community that don't have computer access. And so what we're asking is that I know it's been mentioned a few times about having other options if people cannot get online, but we would like to see what those options would be. Is there going to be some type of a mail out to people where they can actually submit something? But we do have a number of elderly people in our community that do not have access to computers. So we don't want them to be penalized by, late fees because they don't know or have to get neighbors to do the work for them. So we were hoping that that would be, described a little bit better in the presentation today. And that's really our own point, that we did a submission and we passed it out ahead of time. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Great. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Jean, and pass along our thanks to Morley. And we did receive your written submissions. Does anyone have a question for Ms. Mullen? Well, thank you. Our last presenter is Tony Miller, Ontario or Ottawa Small Landlords Association. Mr. Miller, you've got 5 minutes. We see you there, and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, committee members. Hope you're all doing well. I'm speaking on behalf of the Ottawa Small Landlords Association. OSLA is a voice for small landlords in the Ottawa area. And it's important to know that most of our 2,000 members either own or manage investment properties with 4 units, with 4 or fewer units, which means that the bylaw will be impacting many of them. We help small landlords in the Ottawa area operate successful businesses through our advocacy efforts, landlord education, and collaboration with other industry experts. I've already shared OSLA's VUT comments and exemption requests by email with committee members sometime before Christmas. And I had the pleasure of discussing the VUT with some of you via Zoom as well. It was nice meeting Councillor Curry, for example, before Christmas. I'll start off by saying thank you to the VUT team, Mr. Mahoney and Mr. Featherstone. It was a pleasure working with staff on this bylaw. They answered many of my questions and they were very patient with me, put it that way. OSLA has one recommendation for your consideration, and it's about the sale of property exemption. We support the need for the exemption. However, the time frame should be revised so that it's fair to everyone. Under the current wording, a property that is sold in January would be exempt from the tax for the rest of the calendar year, while a property that is sold in December would only benefit from a 1-month tax exemption. It's an unfair way to implement the exemption. So OSLA supports the comments submitted by our colleagues in the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association and by Mr. Dickey from EOLO. We urge the city to add a supplementary exemption of a further 6 months for a purchaser who has bought a property in the last 6 months of the calendar year. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Are there any questions for Mr. Miller? Oh, thank you. So we'll go to questions to staff now. Alors, si vous avez des questions pour notre personnel, Glenn Gower, Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask staff about the issue that Mr. Miller brought up, that Mr. Dickey brought up, and that GOBA had brought up in their letter about that calendar exemption, the tweak that they're looking for. Can staff comment on why they have not included that, or why they've made the decisions that they did in the staff report?
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor. I'll start off, and I'm sure my colleague Joseph can add a little bit to my answer, but it's actually beneficial for them in terms of what we are proposing. That vacancy period occurs for the entire year that happens during the sale. So as Mr. Miller talked about, it would be either, you know, if it's early in the year, it's for the rest of the year, it's late in the year, it's to the end of the year. However, what we've built into the program, and this is automatic, there is no application, there is no exemption for this, is that property would benefit for the exemption for 183 days in the following year. So that gives the property owner some time to decide what they're actually going to do with it. So whether it's going to stay vacant, it's really their choice, or whether they choose to rent it out.
Yeah,
okay.
And to add on to Wendy's comment, I think there is an element of equity, because all property owners have to decide what they're going to do, like to make sure that their properties are not vacant for the first 6 months of the year. And the exemption in the year of sale is actually more beneficial, you could argue it that way, for the folks that are actually selling towards the end of the year, because they get the exemption for the entire year. Whereas somebody, say, that sold at the beginning of the year would, have, more time. You could sort of argue it that way, but the person that's selling at the end of the year would also get the same benefit, even though they sell at the end of the year.
Okay, yeah, I'm following that. Thank you. The other issue that was raised was the definition of arm's length and why equal bargaining power was something included in the recommendations.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Joseph to answer that because I know they spent considerable time on this. They also look to, I think it's the Appraisal Institute, in terms of that actual definition. So something that I suggest is known by law and well used, but he can talk about the application of that and some of the work that's actually going to be done underway as we firm up the bylaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So we did look at a couple of definitions in terms of what we felt we should include in the bylaw, and the definition that's included in the bylaw really reflects or mirrors what the Canadian Institute of Appraisal has as an arm's length sale. Now, as we noted, the bylaw is in draft form. There is an opportunity to take a look at that. The intent of this definition is to make sure that sales are independent. That is really the intent. We don't want people using this as an opportunity to pass on properties in order to work around the tax.
Okay, that's an important distinction. I'll just, if I can comment, Mr. Mayor, yes, we are asking residents to take an extra step now when they fill out their property taxes, but given the housing crisis that we're in, given the objectives of reducing the number of vacant units and the benefit that we would get from these taxes going to affordable housing, I think it's a very small thing to ask of property owners to do on a yearly basis to make that online declaration. I'm a little bit concerned that about those older people in our community, especially the first time that we're asking them to do this for people who don't have internet access, because I know there are people out there, but I think with a proper communications plan, we can address those concerns as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Is there any way, Wendy or Joseph, on the hard copy, paper copy that's sent out for taxes, that there could be some kind of a starburst or different color ink for the notification so it draws people's attention to the fact that this is new and they have to take action on it?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I mean, you know, I talked about how committed staff are in terms of our communications and tools that we put in the hands of our residents. I know what you're hearing from us today is the large number of folks are actually going to apply online, but we will put all of those tools and those communications in the hands of people who cannot do that and make sure that we have an option that works for them.
Yeah, and then it stands out on the form in a different color or something that it draws people's attention. Otherwise, it looks the same as last year's form and no change. So thank you for that. I don't know if these are in the right order, but just on my screen, I have Councillor Eglide and Fleury and then Kavanaugh. Councillor Eglide, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions for staff. So you've indicated that this does not apply to buildings of 6 units or more. Can you clarify, though, that it would apply to units within a 6 or more? What I mean by that is if an investor has bought 2 or 3 condo units in a building and is hanging on to them, not renting them out, not living in them, but the building itself is more than 6 units, would that individual owner be caught by this?
I think the big piece that aligns to the legislation here, Councillor Eglai, is we can apply this tax only in the residential class. So I think we heard from one of the delegations that they were concerned, they raised the issue that we couldn't apply this, for example, in the commercial class. We cannot by law do that. So as long as those units sit in the residential class, then they will be eligible and will have to declare that status. When you talk about units that are, I think it's 7 units or more, Joseph can correct me, and they fall into the multi-residential class, they will not attract this tax because, again, they do not meet the legislation test.
So I, as an investor in a condo building, then could buy 5 or 6 units, let them sit vacant for years, and we can't do anything about it?
If they're individually assessed, no, absolutely not. You will have to, as an investor, declare as to whether those properties are vacant or not. And if they are vacant, then that tax will be applicable.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. The other question is, I forget which delegate raised it, but the fact that many people in fact, pay their taxes directly through their financial institution. They don't really look at their tax bills. They should, but they don't. Has there been any thought given to partnering with the major financial institutions in the city to somehow, at least in the first year or so, work with them to get information out to their customers that might fall into that category, so we capture those people?
We've got an extensive communications plan prepared and ready to launch. And I actually like your idea in terms of partnering with those institutions. And I think that's one that we will add to the list in terms of the communication, so they are well aware of what's happening here in Ottawa, because I agree with you, not everyone who has their taxes paid through their mortgage company pays attention to that bill that comes. But our communications plan is extensive. We're going to leverage every tool that we have available to us because this is new. It's a significant change here in Ottawa that residents are going to have to respond to. So we want to make sure that we get it right.
Well, and thank you for taking me up on that suggestion. As I say, this is no way saying you shouldn't look at your tax bill, but many people just figure someone else is taking care of it in those circumstances and don't. So anything you can do with the financial partners to get that information out to people in that situation, I think would be very helpful. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Eglai. Councillor Luloff, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Ottawa has a very low vacancy rate. So I'm just wondering if the team at Finance has any concerns that the amount of the tax collected will essentially be passed on in higher rents once they decide to fill that vacancy.
I'm going to ask Joseph to speak to that because I know they looked significantly in terms of the vacancy rates here in Ottawa. You're correct, Councillor, when you say we do have a low vacancy rate. It's actually, I'm going to say, changed or increased over the last little while, really due to the effects of the COVID pandemic. They're historically low and have been falling. But this tax is not something that can be passed on to the tenants. It's either if nobody's there, then it's paid. If somebody's in that unit, then it's not applicable.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, so if somebody has their unit vacant for one reason or another, we've heard from some landlords that they're keeping units vacant because of the backup at the landlord tenant board and they want to protect themselves. So if they keep that, if they keep it vacant, let's say for the year, so they've amassed this amount on their tax bill, are you not worried that because we have such a low vacancy rate, that the demand is there, the supply is not, so they'll be able to raise the rent more than what they would have to make up for the amount that they had to pay the previous year in the vacant unit tax?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So, Mr. Mayor, the goal of this tax is to bring more supply back in the market. So we're really trying to encourage folks that are actually holding on to those units to actually increase the supply of units back into the market. And we do expect that with those units added back into the market, I think that will sort of affect the market dynamics in terms of rental prices and so on and so forth. So as Wendy noted, I think we did see an increase in terms of our vacancy rate, but traditionally, I think it's been a little bit lower, probably at about 1.8 and 1.9% thereabout in the years leading up to the pandemic. It did go higher to about 3% or slightly north of 3% after the pandemic. But we do expect, or it is expected, as CMHC has told us, that it will eventually come back down. Now, what we've heard is I think as we the goal of this tax is to bring more units back into the market so that we are more in line with that what is generally considered a healthy vacancy rate of about 3%. So if we can sustain that rate by pushing more units back into the market, I think it causes prices to be more competitive. And then the issue of passing those costs, I think, onto potential tenants then becomes moot.
I hope you're right, Joseph. I hope you're right. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Next is Councillor Kavanaugh, please. think you're on mute, Councillor.
Sorry, touched the wrong button. Thank you very much. I appreciate the questions that have been raised about protecting seniors because I see that in my ward. There's a lot of seniors, and one of the most common things that I've seen and people have reached out to me is in terms of people who've gone into retirement homes, but they've kept their home because they expect to go back to their home. So they can't be talked into selling it, so it stays empty. It's looked after by other people. And, I'm concerned about those situations because they're not living in them at the moment. I'm not sure what the status would be. And oftentimes there's obviously somebody helping them because they're not, that they don't have full capacity to work these things out. So I just wanted to know how those situations are going to be handled. And what safeguards are in place to protect seniors who miss it, that somehow miss that box or something, because as it's been raised, that can happen. And I appreciate the emphasis on putting a star around it or a arrow to say, over here, you got to look at this. It's new. But I just want to know what would happen if they did miss it and it's innocent.
I just want to say thank you, Councillor, because we've heard it loud and clear in terms of making sure that seniors have, I'm going to say, the right help, the right tools, the right communication, so they know, or the people who are helping them know what to do. Joseph can speak to the exemption because there is an exemption for those who are in extended care or hospitalization that will apply. But there's a couple of other things too. So if something does happen, first of all, what we're recommending in this report is that late fee does not apply in the first year because this is such a big change for our city. So we're saying let's grant some grace to everybody as a result of this because we're all learning through the process as we implement this tax. So that's one of the first steps. And then the second step is if something was assessed and it shouldn't have been assessed, there is a full appeal and dispute process that somebody can go through. So then that matter can be adjudicated with staff to make sure that their issues are heard. And I'm just going to ask Joseph if he could speak to that exemption in terms of the providing for care and or hospitalization.
So just had to kind of layer on to Wendy's comments there with regards to communication before I jump into the exemption. We are going to, as Wendy has said, we are going to use all the tools in our arsenal. We're going to be sending 4 notifications between now and when the tax is levied. Between now and the declaration deadline directly to the homeowners, all the 330 homeowners. And as the mayor suggested, perhaps in some bright color. So we do expect that at some point, I think with all the other tools that we have in place, that, the word generally will start to permeate across the city that there is a requirement. However, if they do miss it, we still will send a 5th notification to say, hey, we have extended your declaration deadline. If you do miss that, as Wendy said, there's an appeal process, but they do have an option for folks that are not living in their home. It is, say, perhaps they can, claim that it is their principal residence, but if it is not their principal residence, but they are, under care, that is an option that is available for them. And even though they miss the declaration date, the tax applies, there is an option, as Wendy has mentioned, for them to sort of dispute that and get the record straight.
I appreciate it. As you and I have talked about, there's an issue with, the computer savvy of seniors because I've heard that concern that everything is being put to computers and they're not quite there yet. So I appreciate the extra effort. Derelict homes, we have derelict homes that are uninhabitable, and that's something I faced in Bayward. I'm sure everybody has have them across the city, and they're totally uninhabitable. And oftentimes they're just sitting there waiting for the next steps. And I just want to make sure there's no slippery way they can get out of it, but they're just left there. If they are declared uninhabitable, can they be forced to be demolished? Because sometimes they sit there for years, many years, and that's an issue as well. So can they be chased down that direction if they're left so long that they're impossible to live in?
Thank you very much for that question. So in terms of the way that the program is designed, Mr. Mayor, when it comes to uninhabitable properties, there is a channel perhaps that they could receive an exemption, but it would only be under a court order. And the court order would have to be clear that it is an uninhabitable property because of other issues and not due to neglect. If it is due to neglect, then the exemption would not apply. So in those particular cases where a property has been deemed uninhabitable because of a court order, and that really is the only way the city would know that, or would acknowledge that a property is uninhabitable, it would have to be because of a court order. Then we would actually take the next step to see, is it uninhabitable because of neglect or due to another issue? If it is another issue other than neglect, then we could apply the exemption. If it is due to neglect, then the exemption does not apply.
And can they be chased to have their home demolished?
The demolition process, as I understand, Mr. Mayor, is a separate process that goes through the planning department, and it really depends on where I think they're located in terms of whether they can demolish a property right away, as I understand, or if they have to have a plan in place for what they're going to do next.
Okay, appreciate it. As you know, it's a hazard, and it would move things forward to get new houses in if we can get rid of these places that have just been left to rot away. I just wondered if, in terms of back to seniors, have you looked into using community association type groups for seniors like Old Forge to get the message out? Because they worked with a lot of seniors in the community. Has that been looked at?
That's great, Councillor. Thank you so much for this suggestion. As I said, as we develop our plan, we have a pretty broad plan now, but if you have any ideas, feel free to send them through to us. We are going to be leveraging our community newspapers, our regular newspapers, all kinds of advertisements. And I'm hoping too that we can leverage our councillor network as well to get some of the messaging out on this.
Okay. One more question, and that's related to Airbnb. Where are we at with Airbnb? Because it strikes me that a lot of times when the house is empty, they're used as Airbnbs, that the owner may try and use them as Airbnbs, but I know they're not supposed to be unless the owner is there. But where is that now? Because I know that was being chased by the, where there was a challenge to that rule, and I wasn't sure where that would be and how this would fit into an empty house.
I'll probably ask some of our colleagues at Bylaw Services, perhaps Valerie or Roger Chapman, to answer that question.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the city's short-term rental bylaw is now in effect. The zoning appeal was dismissed by the Ontario Land Tribunal. And so the rules are now in effect, both the zoning and the permit regime. I would turn to Mr. Chapman, though, in terms of any details on implementation, but I believe that EPS is heading towards an April 1st implementation date.
Okay, so it'll be well in place, because I know it was challenged and it was back and forth. I appreciate that, because I was concerned that might be one of the uses of a place that's currently vacant. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Conseil Fleury, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and great questions. Teresa, I'll jump on to your last one, because I do think it's kind of a holistic strategy of removing pressure onto neighbors and the city of seeing vacant buildings. And Wendy, when I read the report, there are a number of allocations to staff, which from my understanding are really to ramp up the program, but I've not seen the bylaw element of it. And I wonder if someone is non-compliant or if someone is vacant, say, then they pay more property tax. Will you be sharing that information with bylaw services to add it to the vacant property list, which I think is all, the bigger part of this picture?
Thanks, Councillor, for your question, and a very good question. We will be working hand in hand with our fellow colleagues in bylaw, because when I look towards their managing of those vacant buildings across the city, the sharing of information will be key between the two groups. So that is happening. It will happen in the future. I mean, our hope, and I say this is our hope, is that from a residential perspective, you'll see a decrease in some of those buildings because this tax is applied to the residential sector only.
Right. And as a second point to this, so there's sort of a ramp up of a program, and that's clear in the reporting relating to FTEs and cost to start up. Is there an appetite as part of the review, and this would be a number of months or years away, to look at additional bylaw funding for vacancy response? Because I think that's part of kind of the bylaw element, is that if a property is vacant, then the amount of fires I've seen in vacant buildings in my area, for example, or particular challenges because the owner doesn't cut the grass, or there's graffiti and they haven't removed, or a broken window, and it puts a lot of onus on the neighbors and the city. So I wonder if that could form part of the review of not just slashing as our costs are reduced because the program is up, that we maybe look at other components of the city that could benefit from those funding sources.
One of the things we've committed to do is report back twice with respect to the results that you're going to see through the implementation of this program. So we'll do a high level review that will come through our annual tax policy report, which is tabled typically in April at FEDCO. And then you'll see a very detailed review that will come later with respect to all of the activity that has happened with respect to the implementation of this tax over the past year. And that's where we're going to speak to the revenues that came in, what the costs were for the city in terms of the actual administration of this program. And if there are further recommendations that we need to make or tweaks to the program that we need to make, then we will make those recommendations at that time.
Great. Thank you for this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Merci, Conseiller. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning to you and colleagues. Wendy, to you and Joseph, I want to make sure I'm not getting the definition of a principal residence mixed up with the short-term bylaw definition. So in the vacant unit tax principal residence, can you just speak to this real quick? I don't know if it's as much of an issue for the vacant unit tax as it is the short-term rental bylaw. But just on the principal residence, can you speak to this as far as a definition?
All right. Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Mayor. So what we strove to do, when we were defining the principal residence, we wanted to make sure that we streamline our definitions and make sure that they are consistent to the public. And therefore, in looking at the definition of a principal residence under the short-term rental bylaw and under this particular program, you will find that they're pretty much identical. They talk pretty much about the same things when it comes to the definition of a principal residence. And the reason for that is we didn't want one definition. Both of these are pretty broad programs. And we didn't want one definition for principal residence for short-term rentals and another definition for the vacant unit tax. So it's the same. So wherever you're looking at it from, as long as you meet the requirements, then you can deem yourself a principal residence or not.
But for the vacant unit tax, I mean, the motivation behind this tax is to ensure that units have people living in them. And it doesn't really matter if it's your principal residence or not. right? The tax is still going to apply regardless whether it's my home or other homes that I own.
Yes, so Mr. Mayor, the tax, the reason why we looked at potentially excluding principal residences from this tax or exempting them from the taxes, we had a number of issues or circumstances that may arise where, say, I've been posted, for work elsewhere at a different province or in a different country, or snowbirds that go down south and may be gone for more than 184 days. So it was important for us to say, if this is a principal residence for you, if this is your home, this is what you call home, and this is where you receive your key documents and all the other requirements that we actually have in the bylaw, then you shouldn't have to worry about being charged the vacant unit tax. We know that property has an owner. The thing that we did spell out is you can only have one principal residence. So if you have multiple units within the city, then one will be your principal residence and the others become secondary residences. And that's where we really need to focus is if you have a secondary residence, this is not your home, as so to say, then what are you doing with that unit?
So just to confirm, principal residences are exempt from the tax?
Yes, they will not be subject to the tax, regardless if you're a snowbird, if you're posted, or if there's a myriad, I think, of circumstances. And we heard from we've heard from residents over the course of the last year or so, as we've been consulting with regards to all the little pieces of this.
Sure, excellent. Okay, on communications, it's not just seniors, but seniors groups like Good Companions, Council on Aging, they would be great community stakeholder groups to work with. I'm concerned about homeowners whose first language is not English or French. We cannot discount the numbers in the city that exist. And I think for a campaign of this size, your literature needs to have maybe not full text translated in the top 3 or 4 other non-official languages, but at least links that people can go and visit to get more information. That's very important. I just paid off my mortgage like last December. I never saw a tax bill. My taxes were paid through my mortgage. And in the spring, I got a receipt from the city that said, hey, you paid again, but I never saw those preliminary documents ever. So people who pay through their banks, again, you have to think about how that's going to be, how do we directly communicate with folks? So that's very important. I did just get my tax bill for the spring for the first time, so I will pay that in March. I think I was the only member of council, maybe someone else, who voted against this initially. I'm very uncomfortable with the city telling people how to use residential properties, right? If it's zoned for residential and people make decisions for whatever reason not to inhabit them for a short and medium term, I think that's a right to the property owner. And I'm very uncomfortable because I think this is the beginning of municipalities saying, well, listen, I have a 4-bedroom house. Not all 4 of my bedrooms are used for sleeping. I could have a Carleton student. I could rent out rooms. I have a backyard. I don't have a coach house in my backyard. Should I be penalized because I'm not maximizing the space of my property to have more housing? Should I be taxed because my 4 bedrooms aren't used? Should I be taxed because I don't facilitate a coach house? So I'm concerned that we're supporting a new tax, and I'm concerned that this opens the door to more taxes in the future. I'm very concerned with housing and homelessness crisis in this city. I don't think this will have any impact on that. I don't. And I'm very concerned with the administration investment to start this off and the ongoing investment. So I need to sort of separate my voting on the tax versus how we implement. I do see them as 2 different things. And so I might, in fact, vote for the implementation, even though I don't support the tax. I think this is, I don't run to create new taxes. I do understand why council supports this. We are in a crisis. But I just want to make sure that we're very aware of what other municipalities are doing, and we not get out of hand where we start taxing people because every square inch of their home isn't filled with people. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But just on that final note though, but principal residences are exempt.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so I just want to ask a question. So I think I'm going to be supporting this because I think we should try this, but I think the review will be key. Mrs. Stefanisson, you noted that there's 2 reviews, and my concern would be, so you put up a chart there that said the startup for this is $8 million, and then we potentially predict $33 million with a profit of $25 million. So if though the goal is to get these units back onto the market, we could end, if we were, totally successful in that goal, we could end up with all those vacant units being filled, and then no one would have to pay the tax. So we would have 0 revenue coming in, but yet costs to run this system. But potentially then we would have a review to say, yeah, we don't need to do this anymore. I guess I wonder, when you listen to Mrs. Perot from Hinterberg saying that there are those houses there that are derelict homes, they're exempt as well. So I don't know that this is going to solve her problem, because if they've been boarded up for however many years, likely they're not livable, likely they've been deemed to be unlivable, and now they're exempt. So I was happy to hear, I guess, that you'll also be working with bylaw, because that's a different problem, to try and get houses that are no longer livable lived in. And if those houses are exempt, they're not paying the tax. So then they continue potentially to just sit there just like that. So I think there's more than one problem, but I think the review will probably show us whether this was a great idea or not. But I'm not sure the tax will be incentive enough for a person to potentially get their house back to being rented if it requires, $50,000 worth of renovations. They might think, I'll just pay the tax. However, all that to say, I'm wondering if we were very successful and every unit was filled, no one had to pay the tax, how much would this system cost on an ongoing basis? Maybe I missed that.
So we do have administration costs associated with the program, but to your point, Councillor, and it's a very good point, that if we're actually able to achieve that, then I think we have to look at how are we doing this? What do we need to actually do it? And probably pare that down. There's a big piece up front in terms of an investment in the entire communications. That's a large chunk of it, right? Because this is a big change for the city. So those costs are going to start to peel off after we get through the first year. And then I'm going to say, it starts to run like a well-oiled machine. So we'll be coming back to you to say, here's what's working, here's what's not working. If that truly happens, then I think we have to reassess the situation to say, do we need to do this, or do we need to do it to the extent that we do it?
Yeah, okay, super. I will look forward to the review, but I'll be supporting this now. Thanks.
And Councillor, I just wanted to clarify one item. Uninhabitable units are not exempt from the tax. The only way they would be exempt from a tax is if there was a court order and the court order is not related to negligence. If the court order is related to negligence, then they are subject to the tax. And from our little research that we've done, I think most properties will not have court orders that are uninhabitable, and those that do, in some cases, are for other issues. Are related to neglect versus other issues. So, in those cases, the tax would apply if it's due to negligence.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification. And if that is the case, I think in those units, the landlord might, or the owner might think, well, but I'm not going to sink $50,000 into it. I'd rather just pay the tax. So I'm just saying that there's 2 separate problems there, but that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Councillor. So on the report as presented, carried. Adopté.
Carried.
Next is update on the 2022 municipal elections and amendments to election-related bylaw and policies. Councillor Gower had an issue or a question, as did Councillor Hubley and others perhaps. Councillor Gower, you have the floor. Merci.
I did. My questions were just about the 60-day blackout period. And I do understand there's a concern about the advantage incumbents hold in an election. I wonder if some of these things go almost absurdly too far, for example, not wearing clothing that matches a campaign color, but I'll leave that. What I wanted to ask specifically though was the communications blackout as it relates to websites, email newsletters and things like that. Section 5 of that part of the report does list exemptions. And I believe in 2018, there were exemptions given to councillors around the emergency response relating to the tornado. Can the clerk's office just give some clarification or advice to council on what kind of emergency or non-urgent communications would be allowed under this exemption?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, and I will suggest the first thing we do in the clerk's office when we are looking at these types of exemptions under Section 5 is I would go to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, look for the definition of emergency, which guides us along in that regard. In addition to the tornadoes in 2018, we have previously approved blanket exemptions for significant events. And one that comes to mind is the opening of the LRT, which we gave an exemption for in that regard. I also know that for sort of non-emergency ones, but still problematic at a ward level, I know in the past for localized flooding, we've also given exemptions so that the ward councillors can reach out to their communities in that respect. As the councillor mentioned, we also have Section 5, which sets out a number of sort of guiding principles to help us. We look at time sensitivity, we look at nature and scope of the emergency or the non-emergency. We look at statutory considerations if there are any, past practices and precedents, and also the nature of the member's proposed participation, what level he or she or they want to get involved in the community. Thanks.
And then the process for that would be an email or a phone call to the clerk's office or to the election office. How would that work for asking for the exemption?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, an email to the ERP website, which we have, would be the simplest way to get connected with the clerk's office.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're recognizing the important role that councillor communications play in disseminating city information. And like we've certainly seen that in the pandemic, especially with vaccination clinics. And I mean, natural disasters and emergencies are an obvious one, but residents really rely on councillors to get information about what's happening in the city and the community. So I'm glad there is an exemption, and I hope that we can use that responsibly to make sure that our residents are informed about important issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley, did you have an issue as well? And then Councillor Aguilar?
No, I've been talking to staff offline. I'm going to continue the discussion with them offline, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow quickly on what Councillor Gower was saying, and I never really had an opportunity to do this publicly, but to thank the clerk's office and the election staff during the time that the tornado was in my community, and not only providing an exemption, but also guidance as to what I could say, what I couldn't say, how I could say it, how I could share the information. So I'm solidly with Councillor Gower. The exemption is an important piece of this, but I just wanted to make the point that in asking for it, colleagues, you're not alone. Mr. O'Connor and his team were extremely helpful in helping me navigate through that situation. It's not one that anybody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, I have a guidebook for this. I know what I need to do." So the exemption is important, but again, I'd be remiss if I didn't publicly thank Mr. O'Connor and his staff for their assistance through that time. And I'm sure that would be available to anybody should something this unfortunate happen to you during an election period. So it's important, and the system works well. And the clerk and election staff are a huge asset and support to you in trying to navigate through a very difficult time, as well as fending off opponents in the election at the same time as to whether or not you're doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. So I just wanted to say that and to thank Mr. O'Connor and his team.
Great. That's very thoughtful of you. Thank you, Councillor. On the report, Councillor Kavanaugh.
just when you were raising the point about information going out to constituents, we do a newsletter every Friday, like clockwork. Would we not be able to do it during the election period?
Mr. Mayor, during the blackout period, that would be prohibited, yes.
Oh, okay. All right, because it's only city information, that's all it is. Okay.
Okay, on the report as presented, carried.
Carried.
Information previously distributed is received. Notices a motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Avis de motion. Any written inquiries?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Other business? Adjournment? Motion to adjourn? Carried, adopté. Thank you all very much. Merci beaucoup pour votre participation, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.